Have you ever wondered why you feel exhausted even when nothing dramatic is happening? Why you carry a mental load that seems heavier than everyone else's, even though technically you're an adult now and should have figured it out by now? What if I told you that this burnout you keep blaming on work or stress might actually come from something deeper, something rooted in growing up too fast? Millions of people secretly pay what psychologists call an adulting tax, the hidden psychological cost of being the responsible one. It shows up when a child becomes the emotional anchor, the problem solver, or the miniature parent long before they're ready. Maybe you handled the conflicts, calmed the chaos, took care of siblings, or became the emotional support for childhood caregivers who weren't fully present. And now, as an adult, you're hyper-independent, always fine, yet carrying anxiety roots and people-pleaser traits you never signed up for. Here's the controversial part. What you thought was maturity might have actually been parentification, a trauma response disguised as competence. And while the world applauded you for being strong, responsible, and resilient, no one noticed the emotional neglect, the hidden trauma, or the psychological burden you had to swallow just to survive. This video isn't here to blame your family. It's here to finally explain why you feel the way you do and how to start breaking the cycle. So if you've ever wondered why relationships feel complicated, why you struggle to ask for help, or why you feel guilty resting, stay with me, because what you're about to hear may just shift your entire healing journey. You probably didn't even notice when you first started growing up too fast. It wasn't a moment you chose. It was a role silently handed to you through childhood expectations, family dysfunction, or the simple feeling that no one else was going to step up. Maybe you were the eldest daughter, the emotional anchor, or the kid who learned to stay strong so everyone else could fall apart. And while people praised your maturity, you carried a psychological burden no child should have held. Deep inside, hidden trauma began shaping your emotional world long before you had words for it. Think about how often you had to sense the emotional weather in your home before deciding how to act. That's where hyper-independence, people-pleaser traits, and anxiety roots began forming, way before adulthood ever arrived. When you were the responsible one, childhood responsibility became your default setting, turning early adulthood stress into something that felt normal. And years later, you may still feel guilty asking for help because you were trained to be the helper, not the helped. This is family role psychology operating quietly in the background of your life. Maybe this example rings true. Before relaxing, you checked everyone's moods to see if it was safe. That tiny habit turned into a lifelong trauma coping mechanism, shaping your emotional resilience into more of a mental load than a strength. None of this was your fault. It was survival. But understanding how these patterns formed is the first step toward inner child healing and breaking the cycle. And once you start noticing the signs, something interesting happens in the next layer of your healing journey. How being the responsible one became your identity. When you spend your whole childhood being the responsible one, the role doesn't just stay in the past, it becomes your entire identity. You start to believe your worth comes from being useful, strong, and endlessly reliable. So even now, as an adult, you take on the mental load at work, at home, in relationships, without even questioning it. You feel guilty setting boundaries or saying no because childhood trauma taught you that taking care of others was the safest way to exist. And this invisible pressure often follows you into every stage of early adulthood stress. You might notice it in small ways. You apologize too much, over-explain your choices, or feel anxious when you're not productive. That's the adulting tax of growing up too fast. Your nervous system thinks slowing down is dangerous. Hyper-independence kicks in, telling you, if I don't do it, no one will. But this mindset is often rooted in emotional neglect and unspoken childhood responsibilities that shaped your attachment issues. You weren't allowed to just be a child. You had to function like a backup parent. Maybe you've even become the overachiever who burns out easily, the friend everyone vents to, or the partner who takes on more than their share. It's not because you're weak, it's because you were trained to anticipate needs long before you understood your own. This creates people-pleaser traits, psychological burden, and hidden trauma that sits just under the surface. And even though you've survived with this identity for years, a part of you still wonders what life would feel like if you weren't the responsible one all the time. which opens a crucial door for what comes next. The cost of carrying everything alone, and how to start letting go. When you've spent a lifetime carrying everyone else's weight, it's almost shocking to realize how heavy your own emotional backpack has become. Hyperindependence convinces you that you don't need anyone, but deep down, that's a trauma response built from years of emotional neglect and childhood responsibility you never asked for. You push through burnout psychology as if it's normal, telling yourself others have it worse. Yet your body keeps score: tension, exhaustion, anxiety, and that quiet sadness you can't quite name. This hidden trauma becomes the invisible tax you pay daily. You may notice how uncomfortable you feel when someone offers help or emotional support. Receiving feels unfamiliar, almost unsafe, because growing up too fast taught you that vulnerability was a luxury you couldn't afford. But this is exactly where your healing journey starts, practicing small acts of letting go. For example, asking a friend to help with something simple, taking a day off without guilt, or giving yourself permission to rest before reaching burnout. These aren't weaknesses, they're trauma coping mechanisms being rewritten into healthier patterns. As you begin to release the mental load you've carried for so long, something powerful starts shifting inside you. You start recognizing the family dysfunction that shaped your role, not to blame anyone, but to finally understand yourself with compassion. You realize breaking the cycle doesn't require perfection, just consistent, gentle awareness. And with each small step, you reconnect with the parts of you that were forced to grow up too fast. That's where emotional resilience is born. And there's an even deeper transformation waiting just past this point. You've spent years carrying roles that were never meant for a child, and those patterns didn't just disappear when you became an adult. But now you finally understand where so much of your anxiety, burnout, hyperindependence, and emotional exhaustion came from. And more importantly, you know it's possible to break the cycle. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but it does begin the moment you stop blaming yourself and start recognizing your story with compassion. So here's the question that matters now. What are you ready to release? Which part of the responsible one identity is weighing you down the most today? And what's one small choice you can make this week, just one, that honors the version of you who never got to simply be a child? Your healing journey doesn't need grand gestures. It begins with tiny, consistent acts of softness toward yourself. If this message resonated with you, don't let the momentum stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep learning about the emotional patterns that shaped you. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. There's a whole community walking this path with you, and you belong here.